Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? Two things. First up, River Valley Glassworks about to launch on crowdfunding from Allplay. Then we'll be talking about Battlecrest Season 2 from Button Shy. What do you need to know about these small but heftier fillers to go onto your table? Right for you, wrong for you, everything you need to know to help you make a decision. Going forward, let's go. So, first up, we got River Valley Glassworks there. We'll cover my drink so you don't need to see that. But what we've got going on here essentially in front of me is a Azul-like situation where you're going to be taking these gems from various parts of the river, allocating them to your rows and your columns, and mix matching until somebody gets to, yes, I'm going to say it right here with a little tracker here. If we can zoom in, that's right, you get to 17 gems. Why 17? I don't know, but I'm sure smarter minds than I have figured that out. This game is really straightforward. You're going to have several gems that you're going to start out with as sort of your hand, if you will. And so when you use your hand gems, you don't actually get to place them onto your board, you place them onto the river. And the tricky sticking point here is in the Azul-like nature, you don't, and this is the twist, right? Don't take them from the place you're drawing from or choosing in that sense like you do in Azul. What you do is you take the shape, again, the shape matters. So here you've got your pentagon. And so I find the pentagon one matching of the river piece. I put it there, and then accordingly, I can grab from one of the other ones adjacent to it. So I can grab this white one or this yellow and blue one. And then I decide to grab the yellow and blue. I take these, I don't have columns for them yet, so I place them in their own new starting columns. This tile gets removed, wrote down back to the end, refilled from the bag based on how many are on the one next to it. So there's one pebble there. This one doesn't matter, but that'll be 2 on the next one that gets filled. Again, coloring matter, but shape mattering as well. So as you're using these up, you can play 1 again to get the adjacent, or you can play 2 of any shape that are the exact same to then play it on any river to then grab from somewhere else. So let's say I want to grab here then. So I want these 2. Then guess what? These 2 are over here. And you're going to go, okay, well, that's well and quaint. We rotate this around here. And eventually you start to use up all of the ones that are in your hand. Or you get shapes that don't really work anymore for the ones that you're trying to figure out. And this game goes until somebody, again, like I said, scores that 17th gem over here onto their board. Then you finish the round, play one more round, KO, game over, score your points. How do you score points, though? There's 3 things you have to know about scoring points. 1, the color rarity, meaning how many in the bag that I'm holding are actually going to come out, and that'll become important in a second. Because then you're going along and you're filling up the rows and the columns, and so you're just mixing and matching depending on which ones you're pulling onto your board, and you're filling them in accordingly based on whether they're already down or you have to start a new column for them. You score the 2 highest columns going across. Ties going to the left, meaning if all 3 of these are tied, I have to score these 2 columns rather than this column. And why is that important? Because this column is worth 10 points. And this column is only worth 6. This column is only worth 2. So you really want to build up columns over, which means you want to save some of the more easier one to get, like the purple, like the white, until the very end, because you're going to have a higher rate of getting them way down here. But as you can see over here, the second point being that that's the rarity, right? And it tells you how many basically allocated are in the bag. And you have 8 different colors that you're going to be utilizing. But you've already noticed that I only have 7 different columns in the first place. So you got to be very careful, because if you ever get, pieces, ever get rocks, ever get glass that doesn't fit in your hand, on the board, anywhere, it's negative points. It's like -3 points or something like that every single one that you get. And you can have that happen if you're not careful, because you have to draw when you draw in a different way. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second scoring value that you're going to be doing is, well, the rows. And this is the tricky point, right? Because you're only going to get complete rows, how far you go over from left to right. And so this bottom row would get me 16 points here, as you can see, because I've got 1 in every single one going to here. If it was all the way, you get 22. But this next row only gets me 1 point because I have a gap there. So if it was here, it'd get 11 points there instead. So that's what you're trying to balance, those 2 scoring mechanisms. The overflow area, as I mentioned, you're going to be overflowing because that hand that I said at the beginning that you draw up and start with, that you have a limited number of these to place down onto the river as you're going. If you ever want to replenish your hand here in front of you, pretend like these were the same, then you have to draw back up from the lake down here, but you have to draw 4. So if I have that I have to draw from, one of these automatically is going to get into the overflow because you can't. And so the timing of that and how many negative points you're willing to lose, how, suboptimally are you willing to have these other tiles be in order for you to then mix and match down here and up there. That's the game in a nutshell. That is everything you need to know. You just go again until you get those 17 gems, you score, and you're done. So again, very similar to Azul. Pros, the overhead. I mean, right? You can explain this. You can play it with anybody. Con, I mean, this row column thing is a little obtuse at first, like how you're going to be actually trying to do these, because at first you're like, oh, well, there's purple and there's lots of purple, and then I'm gonna get the purple, and my purple column is going to be all the way on this side. And then you're like, wait a second, I don't want my purple column to be over here. And then there's purple everywhere, and then I'm going to overflow. Even if you overflow from the column here, it's still an overflow. So then all of a sudden, all these extra purples that are just, flowing my way because I can't get the tiles that I want out here are going to do that. So you have to have it click a little bit in that sense. The other pro is that, I mean, it's simple. It's easy to play. I can play this with anyone. I can play this with my kids. I can play this with my wife. I can play this with my game group. It's dynamic in that way as well, that it's just fun grabbing the tiles, moving the tiles. And there is an aesthetic enjoyment of manipulation in that way, of trying to be clever, of which one I'm going to choose on either side, and using these up so that maybe you don't want the one with now, 5 different gems on it to steal from, because those 5 gems aren't gonna, and you really want the ones, right? A lot of the time in these games, you're trying to get all these resources in at once, and this sort of makes you take whoa, put you on your heels approach, because if you do that, well, yeah, the game's going to be over quick and you might be able to bum rush it to the end, but at the same time, you're going to crappy score and you're going to overload and overflow, and it's not going to work out well. So, actually having some of these build up is a detriment, which ultimately also maybe is a con, because there's not way to necessarily dump these if they really do get overloaded, because you ultimately probably don't have to, do that. And which is a nice mechanism in the sense that I can just take 2 of these gems that are the same size and shape and play them anywhere to mitigate that as well. But the problem is, at the same time utilizing this mitigation is not the end all be all, because you're still suboptimally potentially having to choose between the lesser of 2 bad options. And that's where, it's very similar to Azul in that sense of how hate drafty or hate play do you want to get into this. And it isn't even necessarily as hateful as you can be in Azul, but it's still going to leave you with some suboptimal choices. And for a game that is more like the Perfect Information Euro Azul style of things, it still is going to be a little bit too random and a little bit too chaotic and a little bit too, this is just completely out of my control and I just can't do anything to mitigate the bad stuff that I'm going to get in the first place, because I'm mitigating as much as I can and there isn't as much as I may want, if you're one of those types of gamers as a whole. And the other side of things, again, you're just randomly drawing from this bag, right? Like I just pulled a handful of these gems and you can see the distribution here, and that may or may not work for you. The shapes may or may not work. The combinations may or may not work. So again, it's very nice. It's a very light filler. Honestly, that being said, you know what? This is the sort of game that I sort of prefer as a light filler. Game night with my wife, with the kids, getting portable played. And again, playability. Playability matters. Replayability matters. There's no big smattering of replayability issues. And what I mean by that, I guess, is that, again, with the shapes and the colors and the... Right? You're not going to have a problem with that. It's going to be a different game. But the thing I worry about, it's going to be a little bit very similar on the bottom of this, especially with the rows. It isn't going to be as variable down there as much as the colors and shapes out here may initially lend it to look on the surface, which again is very similar to Azul as well, because how you're filling up that 5x5 grid isn't necessarily dramatically different. So take that for what you will. And that's not going to be a big pro or con necessarily. This is probably second only to maybe Kabuto Sumo for me from Allplay, from their games. So if you're looking for this sort of dynamic and this sort of lighter style, is it going to replace Azul? If you like complete randomness and less perfect information, and Azul is too think out, math out for you, yeah, this one's going to potentially have a slot for you, but it's not going to be as strategic as Azul can be after you're looking at all those tiles and saying, if I put this one in there, there's only going to be 2 left, and then I'm going to have to think about that. And, that person only has, 2 spots in this row. So if I dump this, then they're going to have to take 3, and then it's a little bit of hate. So it's not going to have that level of up here if you're looking for that, but it's not trying to either. It's mimicking, but it's not outright copying in that sense, because it's going to be a lot more random, which if you're a chaotic neutral agent of chaos like I am, is completely fine. But if that's not your ilk, I mean, this one probably is a lot easier pass as well. You know, what I wouldn't mind seeing is just something else a little extra. Some other asymmetry, some other slight power, some other slight mitigation. And I have no idea what that would look like, but I could see that making it, again, just a step up notch that would make it go from, you know, this is nice to play to, wow, this is really going to fit immediately into the rotation of light style. Because, again, the setup teardown is incredibly easy. The explanation is easy. And so it's filling a niche that, you know, again, some of those games like Azul just fill out perfectly. If you want to play with 5 players, they allow you to add a little extra color there as well. So, again, just something slight like that can take it over the edge. So we'll see. Second up here, we have Battlecrest, the Metronn base game expansion with a solo mode as well. Compatible with the first season for Battlecrest. Buttonshy sent me this as well to test out. In case you're not familiar with this one-on-one dueler, well, essentially what you've got here is, well, your Buttonshy style take on it, if you will. Imagine in front of you, this is a 7x5 grid. And what I mean by that is you essentially have cards that could be placed here and here and here and here, actually, well, if it like that, so that it goes along those lines. So you can now imagine that this grid would be 5 that way, and then if I could actually space this right, something along the lines of 7 that way right there. And so without all those cards there, though, you can start to see the spatial arrangement. And so this game actually, for a Buttonshy, takes up a lot more space than, well, the actual size suggests in the first place. So the concept is relatively simple, right? You got your health card, you deal damage, you knock the other person out. First one to do that wins. And you take 2 actions on your turn. You're moving, you're attacking your abilities, or you're resting. And so that's all you're doing as you manipulate yourself around these landmarks, slowly making your way towards your enemy so that you can get in range to actually do an attack against them. So what do you actually do, though, with these cards? If you're looking at your character card, right, they have a special ability, and that's a star activation. And stars are coming from your action cards, but also the landmarks that are setting up that grid in the first place, like these. And so you can see that if you're next to it, not only does it give you a particular bonus, but you can also have another special ability based on those stars that you can be utilizing. So you have a plethora of actions that are available to you, not only on the hero, not only on the landmark, but on the 3 potential face-up action cards that you're going to have at your disposal at any time. Yeah, I punctured myself on the thumb earlier, so I have superhero band-aids. Anyway, so what you've got here is you take these actions. And so one of these actions is to take both of these. Attack with a 2+ range in this manner that's boosted by any of my symbols that may match this, that have already been tapped or magicked, if you will. You can see right there. But then also I get to use a star ability. So in this case, if I was next to this landmark, I could heal for 1, or I could use this force 3 attack, and then may additionally spend one of my own life points to force a 4 at that range of 6 instead. So that's actually kind of cool. Now, you don't understand that, but that's because his sidekick, because some of these characters have sidekicks, some have weapons, actually, after he does forced, well, he does additional attacks. So you force him to move because he actually doesn't have any movement points. And your allies just, you know, take a damage and then they change. And then they get knocked out. But that's the game in a nutshell, right? You have these 6 different landmarks, each with 2 different sides. You can't go over them. You have to actually pass through them based on this moniker, if it's available, or the challenge of which ability or which upgrade bonus, attack, defense, move, heal, that is going to be available to you based on which one they're adjacent to, or if they're adjacent to more than one, really changes the dynamic. This is a very fluid game. The other most impressive element of this, and I remember this from Battlecrest Season 1, this is a mechanism that I am surprised a lot of other games haven't picked up on. I mentioned your 3 cards. As you use them, you tap them. But if you want to get them back, you can't just untap them. You have to refresh them. And the tricky sticking point here is that if you have ones that are refreshed and not refreshed, well, you get to, when you rest, refresh them, but now, here's the fun part about this, is that you untap these, but as you untap them, you also flip them over because they're double-sided. And so now the combination of strategy and tactical nature is completely different than I was starting with as a whole. Because also, as I mentioned, when you tap them, you activate these extra runes that will get activated on this attack to buff it. And it's also the movement points for the available movement of your character as a whole. So that just changes the dynamic with very few amount of cards, which is, again, refreshing. You're not going through a deck. Everything is in front of you. So the biggest plus side is that the dynamics of how you're playing this game are just in front of you as a whole. Now, again, the upside down one side versus the other, if I'm sitting over here and you're sitting over here and you're trying to, read what the ability is and, trying to make sure you know what the other person's ability is. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a pain in the butt, just like a lot of these dueling games. That doesn't change things whatsoever. And, the solo mode is fine. If you're looking for solo, this is something that's going to give you a run for your money. The fact that it's compatible with Season 1 is going to really probably address the other major criticism that I have of this game, is because, I play this, as just the prototype here with 2 characters, and, with some of these asymmetric duelers, you don't get a character you like. Frankly speaking, not a huge fan of this robot to begin with, right? Because his ally, basically, you need to force him to move. Whereas I prefer to have a minion and a character that I can move around, and having a little bit of a dueling attack there at will or ad nauseam. So that isn't my preferred approach, but it's compatible, and with most of the button shies, you're going to get a little expansion that's going to get you another character or 2. So now you've got 6 or 8 characters to go along with this. Pick your poison for, frankly speaking, less than most of the other starter kits for other games out there that are similar mechanistic approach in a 1 versus 1 dueler. Now, downsides, again, the rulebook still is going to leave you a little bit scratching sometimes. You're going to be going back and forth, the 2 rules, because they're bare. They're not going to give you examples in here. You're not going to know exactly sometimes some of the edge stuff of when do I do this? When is the slight adjacency? Another, symbol or 2 here. Which page was it on? So there is a little bit more of that than you would like. But once you learn the game and learn the symbols, some of that easily can just be looked past. And again, the replayability with this game comes from the manipulation of those character powers and the interactions with these landmarks that you have the ability to flip over and combined in whatever 12 different sides you have available to you and mix and match. And again, the manipulation of these action cards in the first place is by far and away the coolest thing. And I'd love to see that in other games. And that's just a clever mechanism. The problem is it also sometimes, depending on your player strategy, doesn't always get away from the slog that these 2-player duelers can turn into, right? Like where my character is next to your character. Now, again, these 2 characters are dynamically different. So one of these characters wants to be next to the other one doesn't. And so you're going to have that yin and yang. And so that's just where you need to make sure, okay, what type of character or character player am I? And is that really the approach I prefer? This game does have a few more keywords, including like the forcing and the actually like taking damage in order to activate abilities or extra activate them, essentially boost them. And so again, it gives you just a slight notch up than the original one, and it works. So you can mix and match without, again, a little bit in the Marvel United senses. I don't need 37 different symbols to make the mechanics deep. Whereas, this only needs about 4 or 5 different symbols, and how you use them on the board is where the deepness of the strategy comes from, rather than the sheer volume of actions in the first place. And personally speaking, that's my preferred type of game. Say what you will. So again, it's not going to be great for everybody. If you're looking for something longer, if you're looking for something a little less, slug them out, this is probably going to not be necessarily for you. If you're looking for a solo, lighter style, though, this is going to be a nice puzzle as well. So take that for what you will. They sent it to me to talk about. Metronn Battlecrest Season 2, coming soon. There you go. Stay classy. What do you think? Light enough? Too heavy for you? Fit the niche? Let me know. Comments, questions, concerns down below. Have a great freaking fantastic day. See you around.